Okay. Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Um, we are from Group 6. We'll present about property, plant and equipment. So, we will introduce ourselves first. My name is Nurul Naimah binti Chilyas and my metric number is 196326.
My name is Haranya Zahira Binti Rushdai. My metric number is 196509.
Hi, my name is Nur Humaira binti Suhaimi. My metric number is 198519.
My name is Nelly Patricia binti Najwa Anwar, 1999-20.
Okay, so we will start first. Process involved in PPE cycle. Okay, so for the first is acquisition of capital assets for cash or non-monetary considerations. An asset acquisition is the purchase of a company by buying its asset instead of its stock. So acquisition of capital asset means that the company, when the company purchase the asset for their capital of the company. So the second is disposition of capital assets through sale, exchange, retirement, or abandonment. Asset disposal is the removal of a long-term asset from the company's accounting records. It is an important concept because it primarily relates to the company's capital assets that are essential to successful business operations. And next is depreciation of capital assets over their useful economic lives. Depreciation of capital asset means the portion of a fixed asset cost recorded as an expense during the current accounting period. In simple terms, since a fixed asset has a useful life longer than one accounting period, depreciation represents the part of its value used up during the current period. And the last one is leasing of capital assets. Leasing of capital asset is a capital lease, is a contract entitling a renter to the temporary use of an asset. So next is source documents involved in PPE. So for the first document is letter of offer to purchase. In this document stated that the buyer has the intention to buy the property and uh, and the in, in this document it will include some important details, which is selling price, set date, initial condition of the offer and purchases. The second is sales and purchase agreement. This document is a document seals the deal between the seller and the buyer of the said property, and in this document will include agreed upon manner of payment, how long the defect liability period is, when and how the buyer will get the keys, and etc. Okay, and the next is memorandum of transfer. It is a signals the both parties will start to transfer the ownership of the property legally completed. And the last one is the facility agreement. It is commonly known as loan agreement and details the terms and conditions of the loan taken by the buyer. So next, I will pass to my friends.
Next, I will present on journal entries in property, plant and equipment. Next, for the journal entries in acquisition of fixed asset, it will be debit on equipment and credit on cash if we buy on cash, or payable if we buy on a credit term. For journal entries for depreciation the asset will be debit depreciation expenses and credit accumulated depreciation expenses. And journal entries for the disposal of the fixed asset would be if it is a gain disposal, it will be debit cash, debit accumulated depreciation expenses, credit all equipment, and credit gain on disposal. But however, if we gain loss on disposal of the fixed assets, it will be debit cash, debit accumulated depreciation, debit loss on disposal, and credit all equipment. Next, then I will present on account involved in property, plant and equipment. From the figure above, you can see that accounts that involve in property, plant and equipment, it will be account for equipment account, accumulated depreciation account, depreciation expenses account, and gain or loss on disposal. From the equipment account, there is a content for the acquisition for the new equipment and in debit side, while for the credit side it will be disposal due to the sale of the equipment. Then on the accumulated depreciation account on the debit side, there will be a debit on disposal, and the credit side it will be the depreciation expenses. And for the gain or loss on disposal accounts, if it gain on disposal due to the sale of the asset, it will be credited. If it is loss on disposal, it will be debit. Next, I will pass to next presenter. Okay. For the flowchart in PPE, first, the transactions are periodically entered from the purchasing process and through the direct input into the system. Then the PPE master file will be updated and produce a number of reports. The periodic report for the PPE is produced and reviewed by the for a proper recording by the physical plant department, and for the PPE for subsidiary ledger is a record for all capital assets owned by the entity. So there will be information for the cost of the asset, debt acquired, method of depreciation and accumulated depreciation. It also includes the calculation for the depreciation expenses for both financial statement and income tax purposes. Then it will be recorded to general ledger is posted to reflect the new property, plant equipment transaction and depreciation expense. Then the subsidiary ledger is reconciled to the general ledger accounts monthly. Next, I will proceed to next presenter.
Thank you, Hanan. Now I will proceed with internal controls involved. There are basically 5 internal controls. The first one is segregation and rotation of duties. Number 2, authorization. Number 3, maintenance and record of documents. Number 4, accountability for and safeguarding of fixed assets. And lastly, independent checks. Next. Okay, for the first internal control, segregation and rotation of duties, the auditor has to see whether there is proper segregation of various duties relating to fixed assets, such as authorization of acquisition and disposals, execution of transactions relating to execution and disposals, and recording of transactions. For maintenance and record of documents, the auditor has to check whether the company maintains proper records of fixed assets, including those items which are fully depreciated, whether the expenditures incurred are properly allocated between capital and revenue. Next. For the next internal control, authorization of acquisition, transfer, and disposal of fixed assets, the auditor has to check the internal control relating to capital budgeting. Expenditure has been received in time in the proper format, approved by the top management, and whether it is properly communicated to the various departments after the approval. Next, whether periodic comparisons of the actual expenditures of the fixed assets are compared with the capital expenditure budget, and whether approval from the competent authority is received if there is a deviation from the budget. Next. Accountability for and safeguarding of fixed assets. Whether there is any system for identifying and reporting damaged, obsolete, and other fixed assets, or whether the fixed assets are properly insured, and the auditor has to check regarding the adequacy of the cover the time period. The last internal control is independent checks. The auditor has to see whether there is any internal audit for fixed assets and determining the coverage and effectiveness of the internal audit. The auditor has to examine the scope of the work of the internal auditors and their reports. Next. Now we move on to inherent risks for PPE. The first one is complex accounting issues such as lease accounting, self-constructed assets, and capitalized interest. Number 2 is difficult to audit transactions such as transactions involving donated assets and non-monetary exchange. For number 3, misstatement detected in prior audits. If the auditor has detected misstatement in prior audits, the likelihood of misstatements in the current year is higher. Next. For control risks for PPE, there are 2 control risks, which is occurrence and authorization, and completeness. For occurrence and authorization, control procedures for the occurrence and authorization of a property, plant, and equipment are normally part of the purchasing process. However, large capital asset transactions may be subject to additional controls. Companies should have an authorization table for approving capital asset transactions. For completeness, the detailed property, plant, and equipment subsidiary ledger usually includes the following information for each capital asset, which is description, location and ID number, date of acquisition and installed costs, depreciation methods for book and tax purposes, and salvage value of estimated useful life. I will pass to the next presenter.
Okay, so I will proceed with the important assertions and relevant audit procedures in PPE cycle. So the assertions, there are some of assertions about classes of transactions. First, completeness, and the audit procedures we can do is the auditors can do is trace a sample of purchase requisitions to loading doc reports and to the PPE records. Second assertion is accuracy. The test amount charged against income and accumulated depreciation for assets written off. Third, cut off. Examine the purchases and sales of capital assets for a few days before and after year end. The fourth assertion, classification. First, substantive that we can do, that auditors can do is first vouch transactions included in repairs and maintenance for items that should be capitalized. Second, review these transactions for proper classification between operating and capital leases. Next, assertions about account balances at period end for PPE. First one is existence, and the test of details is verify the existence of major additions by physically inspecting the capital asset. Second, rights and obligations. Auditors can examine or confirm deeds or title documents for proof of ownership. And lastly is completeness. First, obtain a list schedule of property, plant and equipment. Foot schedule and agree totals to the general ledger. Second, obtain detailed schedules for additions and dispositions of property, plant and equipment. Foot schedule, agree amounts to totals shown on the schedule. And lastly, physically examine a sample of capital assets and trace them to the property, plant and equipment subsidiary ledger. Oh, and the last one is valuation and allocation. Some test of details such as evaluate fixed assets for significant write-off or impairments by performing procedures such as: first, identify the event or change in circumstance indicating that the carrying value of the asset may not be recoverable. Second, verify impairment loss by determining recoverable amount and comparing it to the carrying value. And lastly, examine client documentation supporting impairment of write-off. Next is our PPE case.
Next, I will be present on the PPE case. This case is provided in the document of group 6 questions. Now proceed to questions. The question is that what steps should you take in order to ascertain that the figure shown for machinery in the year-end balance sheet has been fairly stated? Next. So the step that should take in order to ascertain the figure shown for machinery in the year-end balance has been fairly stated. First, will be identify management assertion that did not achieve. From the question, it is that we can see that existence is achieved in verify the current year acquisition of the machinery. From the question, it is stated that auditor carry out the test check by inspection to establish the physical existence of the machinery. The physical existence is a keyword for the achievement for the existence. So existence have been achieved. For the completeness, it does not achieve this because it stated that the result for the investigation, auditor have discovered that machine have installed during the year but were not recorded in the plan ledger. So it is the completeness for the management assertion for completeness does not achieve. So the step that should be made for auditor is to examine the new machine that were installed during the year and trace them to the property, plant, equipment subsidiary ledger and plan ledger. Next. In the question also stated that new machine were purchased to replace the older machine that had been sold, but the ledger card for the older machine had not been removed for the planned ledger. So, in there is some misstatement there. There is the risk for the misstatement there. So, to verify the current year disposal, so auditor would perform on substantive audit procedure, which auditor will obtain the list of all fixed assets disposed and check and verify to ensure that the disposal of all fixed assets have been removed from the balance sheet. in order to make sure it has been fairly stated in the year-end balance sheet. Next. Okay, that's it. With this, it will end the presentation for the property, plant and equipment. So, thank you.